Hi, my name is Peter O'Brien. I'm the drum instructor at Jazz Studies at Bard Music at Bard College. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself and how I teach and about my journey as a musician from student to professional drummer to teacher. And so I'd like to tell you that I'd like to have all my students learn all the fundamentals of drumming, covering all styles, as in current day music, no matter what style of music you're playing, whether you're a rock musician, a jazz musician, especially a studio session player, Broadway musician, whatever it might be, you're going to be required to play most styles that are prevalent in music these days. This is a jazz studies program, but we do cover all styles. And even if you're going to be a jazz musician per se, you're required to play funk, you're required to play Afro-Cuban, you're required to play Brazilian, and be well versed in all of these in a way that your own personality comes out as well. So the end result of studying all these styles and working your own personality into it, you end up being hopefully an individual artist at the end of your studies, not just with me, but your continued studies as you go on in life. A lot of the things that I teach and that I was taught are things that you can work on forever. And not just fundamentals. Fundamentals are definitely part of my daily routine things. There are certain things I've been playing for years and years and years that I keep coming back to, and you either want to just keep your level up or keep increasing that level, but also kind of like can reconnect to certain basic things that are always really important to keeping your playing at the top level. So for me, and this goes back to how I was taught, and how I teach is we start with practice pad stuff, where you're doing rudiments and reading, and we're getting your hand technique to function, and and get your reading going at the same time. And we then do basic drum set stuff, and it depends on your level where we might start. I teach a wide range of students in terms of what level they're at. I don't mind teaching beginners. I actually have fun teaching beginners, but most students that I teach have played at least somewhat, some more than others, and some very great players come, advanced players, and I welcome you as well. And so again, depending on your level, we'll start on the kit and address whatever issues you might have right away. And again, taking a full range of styles. So I have books that I teach out of, as well as I write out a lot of exercises myself. And I try to really tailor what I'm doing to the individual. So like, I do have sheets and I do have books, as I mentioned, that I teach out of, but I also have you have a blank manuscript book, and in the moment, based on where we're going and what's happening, I'll write out a lot of stuff at the lesson. And I find that to be a more personal way to connect with each student rather than just have set things that I do automatically with each student, and it seems to work really well. And so anyway, I'll tell you about myself. My father was a professional drummer, and professional jazz drummer. And I was basically raised on jazz music. Um, I heard all the great jazz drummers and saw many of them as a kid. My father took me, I grew up in the New York City area in Queens, New York, and my father took me to see Elvin Jones and Philly Joe Jones and others when I was a kid, very little kid. And it was also the 60s, so I was also hearing the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and also all the great R&B and early funk music of the 60s. And also, I remember on Sundays after church, my father would always play Radio Wado in New York City, which was a Latin music station. And I heard all this great Latin music that I was very influenced by as well. And much of my early education was watching my father, hearing these records and playing to the records. And through doing that, I actually had developed a repertoire already that I was able to sit in with my father's band at like 7 years old, and in a professional setting, and knew the music already. I started studying with him around that same time too, formally, where I was learning how to read and learning rudiments, and joined the school orchestra at about 8 years old, and was able to become accomplished enough to receive a scholarship to high school at the legendary famous New York City High School Power Memorial. That was actually a famous basketball school. That's where Kareem Abdul-Jabbar went, and it was a New York City powerhouse for basketball, but also a very good music school, and had a great marching band and orchestra. And at that time, I also started, as a freshman in high school, started studying with the great drummer and teacher and drum book author Charlie Perry, and spent close to 5 years with him from age 13 almost through age 18, and became very serious around 14 years old, where I started practicing many hours a day. And also Charlie had an upcoming drum clinic with the great jazz drummer Jack DeJohnette, one of the all-time great jazz drummers, who was one of my favorite drummers. And so I became extra motivated, and that happened when I was 16 years old, and for about a year before that, really ramped up my practice. It was like this motivation to try to sound great in front of one of my idols, Jack DeJohnette. And it ended up going very well. Jack DeJohnette took a lot of notice of me and a lot of interest in me, and ended up recommending me to a lot of people. And it was kind of like a validation at that point that I could be a professional drummer, and I had some great people kind of promoting me and pushing me, and based on Jack's and my teacher Charlie and my father's recommendations, I didn't go to college. I wanted to go to the Berklee College of Music, and I was urged to just go right out and play. And before I graduated high school the last year or so, I was venturing into New York City from Queens and sitting in at jam sessions that were run by, some of the great musicians in New York at the time. Joe Jones Jr., great drummer, son of Papa Joe Jones, ran one of the sessions I went to, and he took a great interest in me. And I met a lot of great musicians at that time and got to play with people like Walter Bishop Jr. and Terra Masahino and many great players that took an interest in me. And through that, I ended up receiving my first professional touring road gig right out of high school, and it was playing. It was kind of a Las Vegas show with dance sets in between. I was required to play a lot of different kinds of music, even including disco, which I had never played at the time and didn't particularly like, but learned how to play it and ended up realizing that some of that was great, and there were a lot of great drummers on those records, and I spent a couple of years doing that, and then was home for a while and back in Queens, and received a call to play with the great Hammond B3 legend, brother Jack McDuff, who I toured with in 1982 for a little while. I'm aging myself there. And then the next gig that I got right after that was with the rock and blues legend Edgar Winter, and I was in the Edgar Winter band for a couple of years, and also doing all sorts of pickup work in the New York City area. When I was home, I started playing a lot of weddings and recording sessions and just kind of the general music work that was available in abundance at that time. And it was a very fruitful period. I ended up going to Europe a couple of times with a great singer-songwriter, Mark McMillan, and then ended up moving up to the Woodstock, New York area, where I still live, and joined the band, the pop rock band Orleans, who I worked with for many years, and occasionally still work with. And the band leader, John Hall, I still am in his band. And on the jazz side of things, I started working with some great people when I moved up here. I reconnected with Jack DeJohnette, who lives in the area. I started working with Warren Bernhardt, the pianist, through some friends of mine that I was playing with. The great guitarist Mike D'Amico, who also teaches at Bard College. I started playing with Warren with Mike, and played on Mike's CD that Warren's on, and ended up touring Spain with Dr. Lonnie Smith, another B3 Hammond legend, and started my association with the great pianist and composer John Esposito, who's also a full-time professor at Bard College. And I've played on numerous CDs with John, probably 4 or 5 of his own, and then other artists on his record label, Sun Jump Records. I'm on a bunch of those recordings, and that's a connection that's still ongoing. I'm still doing projects with John, and we're doing performances at Bard, and so many of my students end up in John's classes, and so that's a great thing at Bard, that many of the teachers, we perform with each other, and we play on each other's projects, and you get to see us play, and we do classes sometimes with each other, and so that's an added bonus of being at Bard. And so I guess I'll finish off by saying that my journey has been, I grew up being trained to be a jazz musician. My ideas of what I was going to do for a while was I was only going to play jazz, and I ended up, because I had learned and been influenced by a lot of other styles, a lot of other kind of work opened up for me, and I was able to make a living solely as a musician and playing all sorts of styles of music. And it ended up that many of the jazz gigs that I got because I could play funk and play different kinds of styles as well. And I ended up, I love playing all sorts of music. I've gotten to play with all sorts of great musicians, jazz and otherwise, and I've been able to develop my own style of playing, my own voice, and have that transfer through all the styles. And I kind of practice the same way in all styles, where I try to push what I'm doing, push my voice through in each style. So that's the way I teach as well. I try to get you to not just learn the rhythms and learn the different grooves and styles, but try to improvise off of those and try to make things your own and make your own statement. And I feel that that's what the whole program at Bard that we we encourage, is for you to be creative and to try to stretch the boundaries of things. And so I hope to see you at Bard, and thank you for listening. Take care. Next, I'm going to do some metric modulations, which if you've never heard that term, basically there are different levels of tempo and meter that exist within an initial tempo. Let's put it that way. So say if we're playing in 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'll put it in a jazz time setting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. We'll count in triplets. 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet. So those are quarter note triplets, which, if you're looking at 4 beats, there's 6 of those quarter note triplets that exist in that same space. So that's a 6/4 polyrhythm, or you could break it down into 2 beats instead of 4/4, call it 2 beats, and then it's a 3/2 polyrhythm. And that's your basic 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 1 triplet, 2 triplet. But you could go 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1. So what I did was I switched the way that I'm counting, so that the 3 becomes the main pulse, and then it's your 2/3 polyrhythm. So I'm just going to play right foot and left foot again the same way, and I'll do the same thing. 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, which could also be 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 8, and then in 2, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and. Okay, so that's the main pulse. I'm going to put this back on 2 and 4 and play a jazz cymbal pattern, right? 1, 3, 4, 1, 3, 4, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 1. So what I did was I switched my cymbal pattern to play with my hi-hat as the main pulse. So I started playing that 3/2 or 6/4, right? So I went from 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet. I'm going to add something to make it a little more interesting. Um, so along with all this stuff, I'm just playing this kind of with no context if you don't have a background in jazz or maybe African drumming or Afro-Cuban drumming, or many different styles involve things like this. But if you're aware of, and you can check out the great jazz drummer Art Blakey, who played a lot of this kind of stuff and did this polyrhythmic hi-hat pattern that I'm playing those quarter note triplets. And he would do it while playing triplets in his left hand against the ride cymbal. So playing this pattern, which is a very important pattern in playing jazz and other styles, where you're playing the trip and let, the second and third beats of the triplet in your left hand against this jazz ride pattern. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Turn this camera a little bit. 1, 2. Get that hi-hat in there too. This is high tech here. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm gonna put hi-hat on quarter note. Sorry, I'm moving this again. 1, 6 balls, or now I'm really thinking in 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. So that's kind of like a jazz waltz. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, like a waltz, or an Afro 6. started putting 4 over the 3 now. So I'm going to slow that down a little bit and demonstrate that. So if you're playing 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, I'm going to do it even slower. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 1. Okay, so I'm counting in 16th notes. It's still pretty fast to count, but 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 1. That's a 4 over 3 polyrhythm. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a, okay? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. That's the sound of 4 over 3. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1. So if you were playing, you'd obviously have 8 of them over the 6. But we'll think of 4 and 3. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, you're going from 4/4 to 6/4, which is the 3/2 polyrhythm twice, up to 4/3, which becomes a double time 4/4 from the initial tempo.